All right, folks, good evening. Welcome to Everything ALS. Tonight, our program is going to be Innovations in Treatment for ALS. And our speaker tonight is I should say Dr. Merit Cudkowicz. And we would like to welcome all of you who are spending your time with us tonight, because this is how we're going to solve the mystery. We go to the doctor when we're ill. Their job is to fix us. We just pay the bill and take the pill. Not so with ALS. We need to partner with our docs. Since this is still a mystery after all this research, I say we need more help. Who better than the ones who somehow, somewhere, came in contact with what it took to be diagnosed with ALS. This is a detective story. No one knows your path to ALS better than you. Let's team up and use your combined experiences to collect the data we need to outsmart this devastating foe. You have already started the process by attending this meeting this evening. So welcome aboard, and welcome to you, Dr. Merit.
Thank you, McFinn. Partnership, that is the word that it sends almost chills down my spine, because that is absolutely what we need. This is a complicated, awful illness that we can only solve by working together here in this room, Zoom room, and really around the world. So thank you for all coming. A lot of you I know, and it's so great to see you. And many I haven't met yet, but I hope I can keep getting to know you. So today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's exciting out there for therapy development, and leave lots of time for your questions. Some of you sent them in advance, and I tried to incorporate answers to them here, but I hope we'll have lots of time for that. You know, I've been in the field for 2 decades, and I've never been more hopeful than now. I think that the science is exploding, the patient empowerment and the collaboration is unprecedented. So I think we can make a difference for people living with ALS today and in the future. So let me see. So I did want to take a moment to talk about one of my partners, one of many partners in the fight against ALS, and this is Sean Healey, who unfortunately passed away last week of ALS. And this is my first talk that I'm giving since he passed away, and I wanted to dedicate it to him and his wife Amy and his daughter Minty. From the day I met him, he decided he wanted to make a difference for other people living with ALS, and it's because of his generosity of finance, but actually even more importantly of his intellect and his strategy and his thinking and living with ALS that we came up with the HEALEY Platform Trial that I'm going to tell you about. So we all promised him that we're going to keep this fight going, like we promise everybody that we meet with ALS until we find the cure. So a toast to Sean. He was convinced we were going to find the cure, and we're going to do it for him and all the other people living with ALS. So today I want to talk about some of the therapies that are in late stage testing, and show really that we've never been in a state now where we have so many drugs in late stage testing. And then we have a huge therapeutic pipeline. And all this kind of leads to, like, we can't keep doing things the same way. We need to innovate in how we test therapies, and we get quick answers. We throw out the duds. We expand on the ones that are most hopeful, and how we all work together really all over the world to do this much faster and more efficiently. So we have, you know, some initiatives in there. There's certainly much more to do and much more input that many people can give, so that we can keep innovating and keep doing this better and faster. So I just have one slide on kind of just mechanisms, and I'll just say that there are actually 4 approved drugs for ALS somewhere in the world. 3 of them are in the US and 1's in South Korea, and many of these are in other countries. But that's riluzole, edaravone, Nuedexta, and Corstim. The first 2, riluzole and edaravone, are, you know, they're not the final answers, but they're steps forward. You know, one of them slows the illness 10%, riluzole, another one 33%. NeuroNEXT is a symptomatic treatment for some symptoms that people have who have bulbar onset. And Corstim is approved only in South Korea as a stem cell treatment. So there's progress, but there's a whole lot more that we need to do. And, you know, we've really learned a lot in the last years. You know, when I started in the field, there were so few people studying this illness and no companies. And fast forward to now, there's thousands of people studying this illness all over the world. And there's you know, more than 160 companies in the space, and it's a hot scientific area. There's people coming into this field thinking this is tractable, we can do this, we can make a difference if we study this illness. And that's a big change, and that gives me a lot of hope because that just moves everything much faster. So even though 90% of people with ALS do not have a genetic cause that we know of, you know, it's 10% have the familial form, the biologies are overlapping, and we can learn a lot from the familial forms that guide us to the treatments also for the more common sporadic form. And this is just one schematic of some of the big targets that there's a lot of science driving towards. There's a lot of data. There's something wrong in people with ALS in their motor neurons and how they handle proteins that are made incorrectly. So there's protein aggregation, and that can cause problems with the motor neuron. And there's a couple treatments targeting that area. There's also data that how things move up and down your motor neuron axon to your muscle is not working right in ALS. And there's ways to tackle that coming out as well. A whole lot of data that there's issues with how your motor neurons make proteins from your genes, whether or not you have a genetic form. It's called RNA biology, and many therapeutic approaches coming there. There's clearly overlaps between the people who have the genetic form and who don't. And what we're learning really is those overlaps are congregating around something called TDP-43, which is a very important protein and how your other proteins are made, and in something called neuroinflammation. So even though you'll see that a lot of data is done on mouse models or cell models on the genetic form, they are informing us both about the genetic form and the sporadic form. So the fact that we have all these pathways is what I think has led to there being these over 160 companies in this space. Because until we had some targets, it was a high-risk endeavor for companies. It's now considered actually a very tractable illness for companies, and one that they can raise funds around, and they can get trials in, and they can get FDA okay for the trials. So it's attracting, again, more and more companies. A consortium that I work with, the NEALS Consortium, we have a science advisory board that meets with companies and gives them advice on how to do trials or preclinical studies. And I know there's these same companies are talking to people from ALS and other groups. And I think we talked to 3 or 4 companies a month. And this did not stop during COVID because they keep having more and more companies interested in ALS. So it is a much more hopeful time than before. I wanted to focus a little bit on just a few drugs, and there are so many in development that it would be impossible in 20 minutes to go through all of them, but I wanted to focus on the main ones. And I'll go through a little bit of the color code here. I think I probably got more confused with the color codes, but the red are drugs that are fully enrolled. These trials are late stage trials, what we call phase 3, which is the last stage you have to do before you get approval. And they're going to read out, if they haven't already, but this year. So that's RNS60, levosimendan, Amylyx, AMX0035, arimoclomol, NeuroNEXT. So those are studies that we're going to know the results very soon about. And obviously, we hope that all of them be successful, but even one of them would be successful, would be a huge move forward. The blue are therapies that have had some positive results in people. So, for example, the levosimendan that's in a late stage trial, the earlier trial of it had some positive results, and same with NeuroNEXT, and same with the AMX0035. But in addition to those drugs, there's a whole bunch that are about to start phase 3 trials, and those are in italics, and so I'll tell you about them. So this is, again, like this is a big pipeline. Again, 5 years ago, this list would have been 1 or 2. So there's a lot of options, and these are all really global studies. So just to highlight the ones that we're expecting results in 2020 or early 2021. So again, all hopes that these are all 5 positive. They're all working on slightly different approaches. So RNS60 is a drug by Revelatio. It's an inhaled drug actually made by a person with ALS, a chemical engineer who developed this as a treatment for ALS. And this is in a phase 2B, phase 3, meaning a late stage trial in Italy, and the results are expected in 2021. And the mechanism of action is thought to be on the immune system, on that neuroinflammation. So it helps make your T regulatory cells function better, so be more suppressive of inflammation. So a lot of exciting preclinical work on that drug that came out of scientists in Italy. Levosimendan is by a company called Orion, and that trial is fully enrolled and results expected in the fall of 2020. And this is a drug that works on the muscles, and it's a troponin activator, meaning it's a drug that works directly on your muscles, helps the muscle contract more efficiently, and would hopefully give people more strength. So their first study, which was a small study, but it was a positive study in that it showed some improvement in the breathing, in the function of the breathing muscle, the diaphragm. So that's, again, fully enrolled, should finish this summer, and the results expected in the fall. And again, since these are late stage trials, and if they're positive, the hope would be that they could go straight to market approval. Amylyx, or AMX0035, is a company started by 2 undergraduates at Brown University who came to Mass General to ask some advice from one of our scientists, Rudy Tanzi, about Alzheimer's disease and their mechanism of drug. And fortunately, Peter Foss, who I think is on the call, and I happened to be in the building when they were talking to Dr. Tanzi, and we did divert them from Alzheimer's. They're still going to do Alzheimer's, but we said, no, this mechanism is important for ALS. And they did a study in ALS, and their drug is a combination of 2 medicines, TUDCA and butanol. And the idea there is TUDCA works on your part of your cells that make energy, called the mitochondria. And we know that's an issue in people with ALS, and that drug can improve how your mitochondria work. And the other one, butanol, works on the machinery in your cells that help your cells get rid of misfolded or mismade proteins. And so their thought was that both these things are issues in the motor neurons of people with ALS, and maybe tackling both of them at the same time might be better than one alone. And that certainly proved true in the preclinical models, like the animal models and cell-based models they tested in. So they announced earlier in this year that they had hit their primary endpoint, and it was a positive study. They are in discussions with the FDA about the next steps, and they're hoping to have be able to announce the full data to patients very soon. So what we don't know is if that will get approved or if they have to do another study, but it's certainly some positive data for the field. Arimoclomol is also in phase 3 testing. This is a drug by Orphazyme, and this works on that machinery of how your body gets rid of misfolded proteins called heat shock proteins. And they had done a study in familial form of ALS, initially SOD1, and had some positive results there. But they really decided, the company, that this was a problem that wasn't only in people with SOD1, genetic form of ALS, but all people with ALS. So their phase 3 trial is in sporadic ALS, and those results are expected also towards the end of the year or early 2021. And the last one here on the list is Neuron by Brainstorm, and this is a stem cell treatment that is also in phase 3 testing. Their initial phase 2 study, which was very small, it was in 48 people, single dose, had some suggestions of benefit on good safety, and now they're in a much larger phase 3 trial, results expected at the end of the year. So again, in my career in ALS, never had 5 phase 3 trials at the same time, about to be done, and they're all working slightly differently, and again, we're hoping that they'll all be positive, or at least some subset, and that can move forward to treatment patients quickly. So those are the ones that are already fully enrolled, and we're waiting for the results very soon. There's also a whole bunch of drugs that are in late stage testing that are about to start or have just started. So these are either open to enrollment now or will be open to enrollment soon. Again, so there's quite a lot of them. Yeah, that's 7 of them. So I'll just touch on them briefly. And again, the blue are ones that have had some positive early phase 2 results. So masitinib is a drug that works on part of the inflammatory system on the mast cells, and they had initially reported a positive phase 2, slowing the illness by about 27%. And they now have the FDA approval to go forward on the phase 3. This will be a global study starting very soon. Ibudilast is a drug that also works on inflammation in a different way on the inflammatory cells in the brain called microglia. This is by Medicinova, and they're also planning a phase 3 global study to start very soon. Ultomiris is from Alexion, and this works on something called complement 5, which is also part of the inflammatory system. So there's a theme here that there's something wrong with the immune system in people with ALS, and that it drives the illness, and we think it drives the progression. And these are 3 different approaches to blocking that inflammation to try to stop the spread of the illness. And that study has started with Alexion at some centers and is opening up rapidly in many centers. Reldesemtiv is a drug by Cytokinetics, and they're planning on a phase 3 trial to start later this year. This is also like the Orion drug of troponin activator, has a slightly different mechanism. They have a positive phase 2 study, and they're going forward for their phase 3. The FALS SOD1 study is an antisense, so like a genetic way to turn off a gene mutation that's really relevant only for people with mutations in SOD1 in familial form. But this had a very positive phase 1 study. It's right on the disease cause of the illness for those people with SOD1 mutations, and that's enrolling in the phase 3 trial currently. That's global. Triumeq is an antiviral drug that was initially in a small phase 2 study in Australia. And the theory here is that some people with ALS might have a virus, what we call endogenous virus, that they kind of inherited from their ancestors that's got reactivated and might be causing the disease. And this is a drug that can block the proteins made by that virus. And there's a European study that's about to start of Triumeq. And Corstim is a phase 3 trial going on in South Korea. This is a stem cell trial that had a positive phase 2 study. It is a marketed drug in South Korea, but it was provisionally approved based on doing actually a large phase 3 trial. So they are doing a phase 3 trial. So that's a lot of information, but I did want everyone to know that there are a lot of phase 3 trials that are either enrolling or about to start enrolling. And these are the ones where they're closest to approval. So they're very hopeful. So I'll just talk briefly, and I wanted to mention in more detail the gene therapy trial, because even though this approach is for the familial form, the same genetic approach can be applied to sporadic disease. And that's a really important step forward for ALS. It's very targeted treatment, but you can use the same gene modifying technology for other targets in sporadic ALS. So this first trial was so important. It was a phase 1 trial, small number of people, but even in that trial, they were able to see some effects that were pretty profound on clinical outcomes, as well as biomarkers such as neurofilament, and has moved rapidly to phase 3 trial. But that same approach is now being considered for sporadic ALS, just with a different target, and particularly the one at the bottom here, Ataxin-2. That is a planned trial that should start soon. It's a phase 1 trial, so early trial in sporadic disease to lower, using the same technology as SOD1, but to lower a different target, Ataxin-2, which we think is very important in how TDP-43, that protein I mentioned at the beginning, ends up being in the wrong place in the cell in people with ALS. So we learn from both familial and sporadic and bring those knowledge back and forth to get more targeted treatments. In the last couple of minutes, I want to give an update on where we are on the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial. And what I do want to share that we are hoping to enroll and open our first sites in mid to late June, and then most of them in July. So I wanted to share that information. We've been working very hard to get this off the ground, and as I say, make the trial COVID-19 proof. so that it can continue no matter what happens with the pandemic here. A lot of people have supported this. It really was the idea and the support of Sean Healey and his family and AMG, but with grants now from Tackle ALS, ALS1, also, and many other people working together to make this happen. So I know a lot of you have heard me talk about it, but I'll just say that none of us want to keep doing things the same way. When we have such a big pipeline and such hope and so many good ideas, we can't keep doing one trial at a time or one drug at a time because it's way too slow. And we can learn from our colleagues in oncology and other disorders who have maybe a decade ago, switched to this more innovative approach where instead of testing one drug at a time, you test multiple drugs at a time. You share data between the arms, you share the placebo group so that you can get answers much faster. You can increase greatly the number of people who are on active drug, and you can cut the cost down a lot. So we are doing the first platform trial in ALS. We hope to start, like I said, at a few of the first centers in June and then the majority in July. We have 54 centers. This is all in the US for now. We are talking, of course, to our colleagues in Canada and Europe about expanding later, but we wanted to get it off the ground, and doing it in one country is certainly a faster way to get it off the ground. So if somebody enrolls in the platform trial, at the moment, we're starting with 3 drugs, but we have a 4th one lined up to start very shortly afterwards, the 5th one a couple months later. People are randomized to one of the agents that is open at that time. And so we're going to start with 3. And then within, let's say you get chosen to go into regimen A, then it's a 3-to-1 getting the drug versus placebo. And I'm with everybody that we want to eventually get rid of the placebo, but at the moment we can't. But this type of approach will allow us to get rid of it eventually. In a 6-month study, and after that, everybody gets open label access to the drug. And people can choose to go to open label there, or they can choose to come back and go into another arm. So it really tries to maximize the choices for people with ALS. The advantage here is, let's say a good idea comes along. Instead of having to start from scratch, which can take often a year, we just amend the protocol and add another regimen, which really takes a short amount of time. So we can keep adding and adding drugs to this approach so that we can rapidly cycle through all these good ideas and get to the most effective ones. So a lot of people have shown that this cuts down the time to getting to an effective treatment by half. So I'll just tell you what the first 3 are, and then what the 4th and 5th are. We're starting with raw pharma drug, zilucoplan, Biohaven's drug, Verdiperstat, and Clean's drug, CNM8 Gold. I don't know why people don't come up with easier names to pronounce, but these are the drugs. Zilucoplan is very much in the theme that I was talking about before of working on inflammation. This is also a complement inhibitor. And we think complements really an important problem in how the motor neurons in the muscle connections degenerate, and also the connections in the brain. That complement is attacking those areas, and using a drug like this that is an antibody against complement can block that damage. Verdiperstat works on neuroinflammation, but in the brain, and works on the cells in the brain that cause inflammation. And then the Clean drug works by increasing energy production in your motor neurons in the brain and the spinal cord. These 3 were picked by a grant review process. Because the Healey Center was providing initial seed money for this, we made it as a competitive application for companies out there with drugs ready for testing. And so out of 27 drugs, we picked the top 5, and these were 3 of the top 5. We do have a 4th one that we're working on with Prolania, and then a 5th one with Implicit. And there's no rank order to this, it's just when they were ready with their drug, and those are going to start shortly afterwards. So all the enrolling centers are listed on our website. We will, as they get activated and open, we'll be updating that. Every arm has an open label extension that was really required. And thanks to our amazing patient advisory group, we are also now looking at into an expanded access option for anyone who perhaps might not be eligible for the arm. We're working out those details. We want to get the study kind of started first, but we heard you loud and clear about how important that is. So these again are the 5 drugs. I'll just add that the 4th one is predopidine, and that should start within 2 or 3 months of the other ones. This is a sigma-1 agonist. It helps improve how things go in and out of the nucleus in your motor neurons, and there's a fair amount of data that that's disrupted in people with ALS, and this has a lot of very strong preclinical data like the other ones. Implicit IC14 is an antibody against something called CD14, and we think that CD14 is elevated in people with ALS and makes your T regulatory cells not function well. By blocking that, you can basically make your T reg cells work well, and they are anti-neuroinflammation. So we're very excited about that drug as well, and that we're hoping to be to add to it more towards the end of the year. Besides testing drugs efficiently, what you can do with the platform trial is really learn about the biology. And we want to learn about the biology so we can do even shorter and even faster trials eventually. So if we can find, for example, a biomarker that changes in 2 months, instead of waiting for 6 months for a clinical outcome, we could screen drugs even faster. But we need to be able to develop those biomarkers. So people who are participating in the study are asked to also give blood and urine and and if they want, spinal fluid, so that we can keep learning about that biology. The advantage in the platform trials is that data all belongs to the community. And you can keep learning from that data so that we can do trials even better and eventually get rid of the placebo or lower the placebo even more. So this was a really community effort. We got great buy-in from the FDA, from investigators, from all our sites investigators, but most importantly, we really got the buy-in from the patients and their help in advocating for this at the FDA level. So a huge thank you for that. We have an amazing patient advisory group. Some of you are on this call, and we meet often, and we get great advice from you. And we heard that now that we have this designed in a nice way, the next step is figuring out how to do even more with it and get an expanded access option. So we're looking into that very seriously and as fast as we can. So I'll just say that, again, we have these 54 sites throughout the United States. We're using one ethics review, and this is a huge advance because, again, it just speeds everything up so that we don't have 54 hospitals repeating the same thing. We have one central place doing all those type of reviews, and it saves, again, months and months of time. So we were all set to start in March, and we had our investigator meeting planned, and then, of course, COVID came. We had to do it virtually. But we also did have to slow down a tiny bit because a lot of our centers, most of them, actually could not see patients for clinical trials. All of a sudden, it was a sudden change. I'm very happy to say that now 78% of our sites are open to seeing patients for trials again. So thank goodness, and I hope all the rest will be open very soon. But that was a big kind of halt. Now we didn't sit back and do nothing. We tried to figure out how we are going to keep this momentum and keep this going, but make sure that it's done in a way that's safe for everybody. So we've come up with some solutions, again, thanks to talking to a lot of our patient advisors and others. And I'll just say that we have 2 amendments to make this more friendly for the COVID situation. One is that if people can't come to the center because of COVID, that we're hiring a service to come to the home to do blood draws. We're also allowing many of the visits to be virtual. We can't have all of them, but we can have many of them. And we're also moving kind of more of the assessments to the home, and that's coming in Amendment 2. But we can start with Amendment 1, and we're almost, we submitted that, we're almost approved for that. And we're expecting any day approval for that. And then we're going to start activating the centers that are ready. And we have, I'd say, several that are ready to go in June, and the majority in July. So I think this is the way to do it. There's other innovations, I'm sure, that will come from other people and good ideas, but this is a way to cut down the time in half and the cost by a lot and really increase access for people. So I think we have the buy-in, we're ready to go. And I wish it could have been sooner, but I think we did the best we could in what was a very unpredictable time with the whole COVID-19 episode. So even though I'm the one here talking, this was like a community effort, a global community to figure out how to do this well. And so I hope I left enough time for questions.
You sure did. Thank you so very much. So Zoe?
I'd like to unmute Indu first. We
Oh,
can,
okay.
because we skipped by her at the beginning, so I know she wanted to have a moment to honor Merit for what she's doing both today with us, but also within the ALS community. So I'm looking for Indu to unmute her again. You there, Indu?
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you, Merit. I think I was going to do an introduction, but you did a great job. And, you know, I'm honored to call Merit a friend, and I've seen her work on this. And for Merit, you know, it's personal. And, you know, we are so glad that we have somebody like Merit who can actually work and fight ALS on our behalf. So everybody who's on the call here, you know, we are over 214 people here. And I think, you know, we're all working towards trying to find cure. And everything ALS, we're all patient advocates. We all have been personally affected by ALS in our lives. And we're here to, you know, not leave this until this is solved. And, you know, partnering with Merit is something, it's an honor, and we feel very optimistic about it. And as we, you know, as the next into the program, we have two people, Zoe Lalji here, and you've probably seen her on the chat. And Zoe also understands what ALS is all about. She's 19 years old, and she is going to be attending UT Austin. And her father has been affected by ALS, so she will be monitoring. And if you have any questions, please put it on the chat, and she will be moderating. And also there is Tara Tarimala, who is just finished her pre-med from Case Western University, and she is also my niece. Her uncle was affected by ALS. So she is going to be also moderating and asking some questions to Merit. Thank you, Merit.
Sure. Thank you, Indu.
Tara and Zoe, you can take over.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Cudkowicz. So you talked about some of the phase 2 and 3 trials. So Harris Davis asks, which treatments in clinical trial phase 2 and 3 are you most excited about?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I'm excited about a lot of them, put it this way. I think the, you know, I briefly mentioned this Ataxin antisense oligo approach. I'm very excited about that. That's new, but there's a lot of data coming from Aaron Gittler at Stanford and others that particular protein, if you lower it, you can protect motor neurons, and you can protect the axon, the connection between the motor neuron in their spinal cord or the brain and the muscle. So I think that's a very exciting approach, and that trial hopefully will be starting in 2020. You know, I think the, you know, all the drugs in the platform trial I'm excited about. I think they have good mechanisms of action. You know, I think it's going to end up being a combination. I mean, that's not like, it's not my idea. Everyone thinks it's going to be a combination because there's so many different biologies happening in ALS, and unless we can identify the absolute first one, you know, one that triggers everything else, we're going to need to have multiple drugs. So I'm hopeful that many of them will work.
Awesome, thank you. Zoe?
Yeah, I have a question from Mary, and she wants to know if protein aggregation could be due to some sort of infectious agent, such as fungi, virus, or bacteria, and if there has been any trials with antifungals, intrathecally, IV, or oral, and also how these treatments may be on their way for approval in the United States and possibly in Europe. So kind of a little question, but.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I mean, you probably all remember how people thought that stomach ulcers were from like bad mothering, and now it turned out to be from a bacteria. So it's hard to ever say it's not infectious, right? Because it's hard to disprove it. But, and I do think that we're learning that the bacteria, and particularly viruses, could be involved. So there's this whole new story of endogenous retroviruses, which are viruses that maybe your grandparent got and left some of its viral genetic code in you and gets reactivated and can cause ALS. That has solid science. And there's new science now about the microbiome in your gut. Those bacteria might influence your course. I think there's less going for fungus right now, but that doesn't mean it's not a possibility. It's just, I think, maybe less studied. So I don't think there's ever been a good clinical trial of an antifungal drug. And we're really just now doing, I mean, there's now a couple studies of antiviral treatments for ALS. So I think the whole infectious idea is having a rebirth now in ALS.
Awesome, thank you. Harris Davis also asked and said, a recent announcement of therapy addressing the misfolding of proteins that the FDA designated to be fast-tracked for orphozymes arimoclomol. What does fast-tracked realistically mean?
Yeah, so fast track, basically for a disease like ALS, if a company applies for fast track, they're going to get it. What it means is it's for a rare disease, a serious disease, and it means that you get like extra attention from the FDA and extra speed, so that if a drug is positive, they will move faster to getting approval, or they'll give you more help along the way. So it doesn't mean that it's approved yet. It just means that if it's positive, they'll move much faster. So it's good news, and every ALS company should apply for fast track.
Awesome, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so we have another question from Liz Kanan, wondering about if there are any experience with heavy metal toxicity in ALS patients.
Yeah, so my general thought is that this is not a big factor in it. And the reason I say that is because people have looked in many ways in hair samples and in bone samples and have not really found it elevated, with the exception of one study where they actually did bone biopsies and found elevated levels of some heavy metals. But most of the data is not pointing towards this having a major role. Again, it's hard to completely disprove a theory, but I would say of all the theories out there in ALS, it's probably not on the top kind of 5 or 6.
Awesome. Harris Davis also asked, if approved by the FDA, how long do you think it will take NeuroNEXT to be available to patients? Would it be available by early 2021?
I hope so. I don't have a clear answer on that. I know there's a commitment all around to move as fast as possible for Brainstorm, as well as actually any of the other ones in phase 3, that if it's a positive signal, that it will move fast. Brainstorm, because it's a stem cell treatment, is probably a little harder to move super fast than, for example, the Orion drug, the levosimendan, which is a pill, which the company could have a large supply of ready to give out. For the stem cell, you really need to have the stem cell facility to grow the cells, and you need the hospitals to administer it. But I think the commitment is to move as fast as possible, and I know obviously the company is trying to build up those facilities, so there isn't a delay. And I know there's so much advocacy on the patient end for that. I think the FDA will move as fast, very fast, if it's a positive result.
Thank you.
The next question comes from Marcia Kaplan, and she would like to know what the timeline would be for enrolling in New York at Columbia. I'm assuming one of the clinical trials.
Oh, I think the last I heard is that they're close to starting to enroll to open up again for new studies and new patients. So you do bring up a good point that there's a lot of geographic variability. What I'll say, for example, I think for the platform trial, of the sites that look the closest to being ready, a lot of them are in Texas. So I think the sites that perhaps were hit a little less with the COVID might end up being faster, but Columbia has a great center, and they're working very hard with their institution to be able to be open for ALS. So I hope they'll be soon, maybe July.
We have another question, and someone asks, I would like to know if liver problems are associated with ALS, fatty liver. Should we be proactively working on liver health and detoxification?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'd say we don't fully know. There are some liver, when we do blood tests on people with ALS, the liver enzymes are slightly elevated. They're not, in any dangerous area, but they are a little elevated. And so I'd say again, we don't know for sure what that means and if there is a problem. But I guess general good health, is a good idea. I don't know. I would do a heavy liver detox though.
Thank you. So the next question comes from Elizabeth McCormick, and she would like to know the exclusion factors that include gene therapy. Does that include NeuroNEXT? Because some people consider NeuroNEXT as a type of gene therapy.
So I'd say it depends on the trial. So I'll just say for example, for the platform trial, we do not exclude anyone that had a prior stem cell treatment. And my personal thoughts are that those stem cells don't stay around very long. And it's impossible to know exactly how long they stay, like as opposed to a drug where you take a drug and you measure its levels in the blood and if it stays in your blood 8 hours or 4 hours. You can't really do that with stem cells. But most, data suggest they don't stay around that long. So it's not a gene therapy, and there really shouldn't be a reason to exclude people who are in NeuroNEXT or other stem cell trial from being in a new trial. So we specifically are not having that exclusion criteria, but other companies do exclude it because they don't know, right? They say, well, we don't really know if the cells are gone or not. So that can be a problem. But I think we need to advocate that isn't an exclusion. Gene therapy itself is a different kind of thing because some gene therapies do stay forever. They're meant to be forever, and that can sometimes exclude people from future trials.
Thank you so much. Another question we have is, I've heard that ALS patients have problems absorbing vitamins and nutrients. Is that correct? Because most ALS patients take a lot of supplements, how do we know if they're being absorbed? Would it be beneficial to take a tincture sublingual rather than swallowing supplements or pushing them through a feeding tube?
I think it's a really important question that we have to figure out and study. I'd say we don't really know. The only data I've seen, and when we once did a study of a high calorie diet, and we found that actually a lot of the calories weren't being absorbed. And so I do think that there might be an absorption problem, but I don't know that we know that it's specific to supplements or vitamins or how to get around it. So I think you're bringing up a super important point, but I don't know that we know enough yet to say that we need to take it sublingual or do another way.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes from Ty Gaines. Many PALs, such as myself, don't qualify for clinical trials based on FVC scores or duration of disease, etc. And he was wondering if that excludes them from being able to receive the treatments after they've been approved by the FDA. And they gave the example of Radicava, which was approved by the FDA for everyone, but her neurologist said that their insurance didn't qualify for them to use it because of their FVC. Yeah,
again, a really good question. And this is again where advocacy from patients, but also from physicians and the scientists is important for educating insurance companies. So, the trials are designed in a certain way to get a quick answer, a reasonably quick answer with the fewest number of people, but they don't mean that doesn't work for anybody else. And so with Radicava, the insurance companies just went, they went strict, like only people who were fit the initial inclusion, which would have been 7% people with ALS, and that was just wrong. It was the wrong conclusion and wrong approach. And now it's better, but it took 2 years of a lot of lobbying. So I think it's a unique thing in the U.S., unfortunately, but it can be overcome by advocacy and education. You should not be excluded from taking drugs that are proven correct in trials, and that doesn't happen in other diseases. So it doesn't make any sense, but you're right, the insurance companies do it. But so I think, for example, Amylyx and some of these other companies, they've learned from that kind of challenge that MT Pharma had, and are doing much more proactive work to educate the insurance companies.
Thank you. Another question we have is, my neurologist has just introduced me to peptides like MP157. What are your thoughts and what have your experiences been with these?
So I will confess completely now that I am totally depending on Zoe's mom to help educate me on peptides. I don't know if Dr. Shell is on the call. I'm just starting to learn about it. A patient of mine brought this up to me as something that they thought was interesting and sent me some papers. And this is how we partner and learn together. So I'm in a steep learning curve about peptides. So I hope maybe if you invite me back again, I'll be able to answer that question better. I think we need to dig a little bit more into it.
Thank you. The next question comes from Brian and Maria, and they're wondering if people are looking into whether PALs that have specific issue, the specific issue that the drug is supposed to be attacking, whether we're looking for those specific PALs when they are put into a trial.
Yeah, I think so. It depends on the trial. So there's some trials that the biology is present in everybody with ALS, and so you take everybody. There's other ones that are more focused towards people who have a certain biology. For example, these antivirus drugs I was talking about. So there's a study at the NIH, at the government research just for people who carry high levels of that virus called HERV-K. So it depends on the drug. If it only makes sense it'll work in people who carry that biology, then you have to have kind of these more targeted approach. And I think we're seeing both types of approaches in ALS now.
Thank you. We have a question from Dr. Victor Nakashi, who is a practicing neurosurgeon, and he says, for some cancer, there are trials without placebo and phase 3 trials. What can be done to have ALS in the same status?
Yeah, very good question. And I think we need what's called a surrogate biomarker. So in cancer trials, they can see if the tumor shrinks or not. So if you have something that if your drug changes that, it means it's going to have a positive clinical outcome, you can get rid of placebos. And so that's part of what we're trying to do in the platform trial by building in all those biomarkers. We need that type of short-term outcome, that it's correlated strongly, and with a clinical outcome, but that it's definitive. So I think we're getting closer. I mean, there's one biomarker I mentioned briefly, neurofilament, which is a protein in motor neurons that when they're damaged, leaks out into your blood and spinal fluid. That's our closest maybe surrogate. And another way to explain it is if you think about cholesterol, like if we know now that if you lower cholesterol levels, that will prevent heart attacks and strokes. So when you do trials for cholesterol lowering drugs, you don't need a placebo. But when they first did them, they did. So I think we're getting there, but we need that type of what's called a surrogate biomarker or something that we can see that response to the drug in a shorter time. I hope again that platform trial will help us get there.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. The next question came from Michelle, and she's wondering what the percentage is like of the familial ALS patients versus the sporadic ALS patients participating in the platform trials.
Oh, so they're both eligible to be in the platform trial. Most of the time we see, maybe 8% familial, but I think now that there are these gene therapy trials just for the familial forms of the illness, I think we'll see fewer people going into the platforms. And as a physician, I tend to recommend the patients I see who have a known gene to go into the gene therapy trials for their gene, if they exist.
Thank you. The next question is from Michael Chavez Riley, and he says, as a recently diagnosed PALS, I'm eager to help in the fight for a cure. In addition to fundraisers, how else can people with ALS contribute? How could other PALS skills be tapped? PALS are certainly motivated to help, and it feels like our vast set of skills and experience is underutilized. Do you have any suggestions?
I think there's lots of ways, and thank you for offering that. One, of course, is by being part of these studies, whether it's a trial or a biomarker study. I personally think that every person with ALS should be contributing their clinical data and biomarker if they want. I mean, they do this in cancer, where they collecting data from everybody so that you learn from everybody. I think the other ways are being part of these groups like Everything ALS or I Am ALS or in these patient advisory groups where you can contribute your knowledge and your expertise. I agree with you. We need everybody on deck.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Richard about if there's any research currently on low-level light therapy.
That's a good question. Not that I know of. I mean, there is in Parkinson's disease and MS. So I think there is some, data for other neurological illnesses that low light therapy might be helpful. But I have not seen anything in ALS, which doesn't mean that it's not happening, but I haven't seen it.
The next question we have is from Nathan Graves, and he says, it has been hypothesized that a retrovirus could be included in the etiology of sporadic ALS. How could a person with ALS garner testing that qualifies and quantifies the presence of reverse transcriptase or associated inflammatory cytokine signatures?
Yeah.
Could a sufficient presence of one or both of these warrant the trial of an antiretroviral therapy?
Yeah, really good question. And I even though Indu doesn't know I'm looking at her because we've had these conversations. Right now, it's very hard. Like the only way to find out is to enroll in the study at the NIH with Dr. Avi Nath. And your neurologist can help you do that. I've done that for a lot of our patients. It's all could be done remote to get consent remote and send your blood to him. But we do have to get to the point where there's a place where we can send the people that we see your bloods to get, the HERV-K levels, the retrovirus levels, to get neurofilament, to get other biomarkers, and to do it in an easy way. Right now, it's your neurologist knowing who's doing that research and arranging it. It's a little cumbersome, but I know that's one of the think tank ideas of how to do that better.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes from Michelle. In Dr. Bilak's reversal studies, he spoke of renervation which is common among all PALS reversals. Do you see any of the clinical trials seem more predisposed towards that?
That is a great point. So, if 6 months ago I would have said no, but in the last 6 months, I've talked to several companies that are developing programs in reinnervation, which is very exciting. So the whole process of how the motor neurons that are healthy and are surviving, how can they sprout and start to send their processes to the muscles where the motor neurons maybe weren't so healthy and reconnect. And if we can understand that biology and augment it, then now you start talking about repair. So I do think that there's some people are doing it naturally, and we can learn from those people, the reversals. And there are a couple companies now that are developing drugs in that pathway. But none of them are ready for going into people, but the fact that they're even doing it is really outstanding.
Thank you. We have a question from Sherry, and she says, are there any other treatments for those who don't qualify for trial, including self-pay options or alternative therapies?
Yeah, I do think they are. I mean, I think that it really has to be a good conversation with you and your neurologist. There's some things out there that have, again, positive data in phase 2, but maybe we don't know 100% that they work, but they look promising and they look hopeful. Some of them are supplements that you can easily take. Some of them are prescriptions. But it really has to be kind of individualized with you and your doctor. The other thing is there's this expanded access program we now have 6 expanded access programs at Mass General. And so now that I've done it a few times, it's not no work, but it's not that much work. And it's really talking to your center and seeing if your doctor might be able to do that and offer that. And you need the company to agree to give it. You need your doctor to apply to the FDA and the IRB, but it is a process that could be available for people. And I know that there's patient groups trying to advocate for that at the federal level, and I hope we're going to see a lot more of that in the next year.
Thank you. The next question comes from Rebecca, and she would like to know what exactly would disqualify a patient from the NEALS platform trial.
Yeah, so we tried to make it as broad as we could, but also be able to get an answer with 160 people per regimen in 6 months. So it was a balance. So the I would think the main entry criteria are having the illness for less than 3 years, which again is broader than other trials at 2 years, but it still will exclude people who've had it longer than 3 years. And then the breathing higher than 50%. And so what we're talking about with our patient advisory group is, can we have other options for the people who are not eligible? And I just think that's a fabulous idea. I thank them for bringing it up to us. We're just now trying to figure out what that might look like, and how much it would cost, and how can we do that.
Thank you. And the last question that I have, also from Sherry, and it's a very general question. She says, do you have any details on partial reversal of function?
I think it's amazing that it happens, and it gives us hope that if whatever's causing the motor neuron to be injured stops or slows down, that your body has a natural way of repairing it. And I know obviously Rick is the leader on this, and I have myself two people who I've seen have that partial recovery. So I think it happens, and we just have to understand the biology. I mean, you can learn so much from people who have rare events like that, and to help everybody else. So I applaud him and everybody who's helping him with that.
Thank you. The next question is from Sanjay, and he's wondering if HEALEY ALS platform trials are open to international patients.
Yeah, they are. So we have no restriction on where you live. With the only issue is the ability to come to the center. And before COVID, it was feasible. now it's a little harder, but not impossible.
Well, thank you. The next question is from Kirstine, and she's wondering if any of the trials actually eliminate based on blood types or have restrictions based on your blood type. And she thinks that the exercise-triggered ALS trial may have that restriction.
I have not heard that. So you might know more than I do on this one, but I have not heard a trial restricting on blood type.
Okay. The next question is from Marcia. And she's wondering if there's any thought of isolating those who have a positive result to the trial and finding a commonality between those people and why it may have worked better. And looking at the ones that it didn't work for and those similarities there.
Yeah, very, very good point. And I think we have to do that because it might be that drugs work in some subsets and not in everybody. The challenge, of course, is figuring out who are what's called responders. And again, like in cancer, it's easier. I mean, it's an awful disease, but it's easier because you can see if the tumor shrinks or not. We don't have something like that to know if somebody responded or not, unless, of course, it stops the illness or people get better. Then it's obvious. But if it slows it down 50% in one person and 40 in another, we don't have the tools to figure that out. And that goes back to this biomarker. Like if we could develop some way to know, yes, this drug lowered your neurofilament by 50%, and that's a responder, then we can do all those type of analyses.
Great.
So you're right, you got to do it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Deborah would like to know if there are any studies currently on complement evasion by microbes for ALS patients.
That's, I don't know exactly if there are. I think people are, I mean, the whole microbe field in ALS is somewhat new. I'd say like at less than a year. So I think people are starting to look at this, mainly focused on the gut and then your immune reaction to that. I've seen a lot of studies now on the T cell reaction to microbes, but not the complement, but I'm sure it's coming. So it's a good idea.
Great. The next question is from Michelle. She recognized that you mentioned ALA and the methylcobalamin in the intro, and if She's wondering if you're aware of any studies of other integrative therapies evaluating studies evaluating the method of delivery, IV, sublingual, oral, etc.
Well, for the methylcobalamin, there is another study going on in Japan, a second study in very early people with early in the illness, because that's the kind of subgroup they saw the best response. So that's ongoing. I know there's groups trying to study cannabis because we know a lot of our patients take it. It helps with symptoms, but to try to do some real studies on that, and does it also help with protecting the motor neurons? So I do think we need to do those kind of studies. They're hard to fund. That's I think would probably be the biggest barrier.
Okay. Thank you. Margaret would like to know, where are centers in Florida specifically that are open to ALS platform trials?
Oh, sure. So we have, I think, 3 or 4 in Florida. So Holy Cross Hospital in Fort Lauderdale, I think they're actually close. They'll be one of the earlier sites. University of Miami, Mayo in, I think, Jacksonville, and I think Tampa as well.
Okay, great. The next question is from Prem. And
Hey, Prem.
if TUDCA or AMX 0035 is used in other diseases already, mainly for the safety concerns.
Oh, they're doing a trial in Alzheimer's disease, but they don't have any results of that yet. I think TUDCA is TUDCA is an old supplement that was used for people with gallstones. So I think there's a lot of data on its safety. The other part of the combination, Bufenol, is used for a very rare childhood illness. So there's perhaps less information on that.
Okay, great. The next question is from Eben, and they would like to know what advocates, legislative or otherwise, can do to move ALS research forward or get effective treatments to patients quickly.
I think the recent bills that patients have been advocating for are just amazing. I think I hope they go through. They would really raise significant dollars to help with things like expanded access or open label extension or more better access for people. I think continuing the dialogue with the FDA, I think it's been very productive about how many studies are needed to before you get approved, and ways to be more innovative. You've made huge. I mean, I can thank you guys enough for the impact you've already made on the FDA, but obviously you have to keep that advocacy out.
Great. The next question is from Asaf. They were wondering if you could comment on the theory of Lyme or Borrelia origin of ALS, and at least some cases where antibiotics is used as treatment.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think that the data isn't that strong for Lyme and ALS, and I know that's controversial. Now, most people, so there's some data that ALS, in sporadic ALS, that there's probably 5 or 6 things that happen to someone in their lifetime that lead to ALS. And those 5 or 6 things could be different between different people. So it could be that an infection like Lyme or another infection could be someone's 5th thing, the last trigger. It's very hard to prove or disprove. But I have not personally seen, antibiotic treatment help, but I know there's case reports of it. We did a whole trial of ceftriaxone in about 600 people with ALS for a different reason, but it didn't work. So I know it's controversial, but again, I think of all the science out there, it's probably not high on the list of exciting targets.
Okay, great, thanks. The next question is from Tara O'Brien. And she's wondering if, given the limitation on research to date, where are we in exploring replacing placebo arms with synthetic control arms?
I hope we're close. Again, I hope that's one of the outcomes of the platform trial. I think part of the challenge, and why it hasn't happened to date is that the natural history is changing for the better. People are doing better over time. So it's been hard to use past placebo groups. And because the drugs that have been tested in the past have, if anything, had small effects, it means that it's very hard without a placebo group to tell an efficacy. As we get better drugs, they're going to have much bigger effects. The need for placebo group goes down. And as we pool placebo groups, like in the platform, and use them over time and show that they're stable, you can start to get rid of placebos. So I think everybody wants to do that.
That makes sense. Okay, the next question is from Morgesh Navar. And he's wondering if the acceleration of potential COVID vaccines with the emergency use authorization and other forces could possibly end up helping accelerating ALS cures.
I think so. I think some positive stuff has come out of COVID. And first of all, the whole ability to do visits virtually, which was so hard to get before, is now like, yes, absolutely, we can do it. So I think trials are better because of that. And the speed of a review is also better. So I think we can harness a lot of good. Also, a lot of the drugs being tested for COVID are ALS companies. So the same inflammatory response that leads to the serious problems of COVID are found in ALS. So as those companies do the COVID studies, they're learning things that we need for ALS and also getting resources.
Wow, that's incredible. The next question is from Tom, and he's wondering if there's any evidence that ALS may be triggered by trauma from major surgeries, for example, knee replacement, spinal fusion, etc.
Really good question. So the epidemiology suggests a small risk of trauma. And again, I think it goes back to this idea that it's not one thing in somebody, it's cumulative things that happen to them, and that trauma might be the last one. And certainly clinically, we see, those kind of stories that you're describing.
Great. So the next question is from Marcia Kaplan, and she's wondering whether PALS can take NurOwn treatments indefinitely, since NurOwn wears off after 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I hope so. I mean, the trial was only with 3 treatments, but it was never thought that was going to be it. But that's what we needed to do to show if it worked or not. So that if it does work, if they show that positive, that probably would be a lifelong treatment.
Okay. So the next question is from Katrina, and she wanted to ask about the Promising Pathways Act introduced by Senator Braun and Senator Murkowski, which was scheduled for argument today. And she was wondering, if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I haven't heard about anything today, but I think it's really important. This is how you get more federal dollars out there for illnesses like ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases. I think it was brilliant to tie it into other neurodegenerative diseases. So I hope it will pass, but I haven't heard anything from today's. Hopefully it was argued.
Zoe, if I can just interrupt for a second, we actually have a conversation going with several of our senators and congressmen on the ALS caucus, and we're hoping to bring them on to a future call so that you can get those types of questions answered.
Great. So we actually had another question about the 2 bills introduced in Congress. So I hope that answered your question. And if not, Elizabeth, you can comment in the comments with another question. Another question is from Kathy Maithes. Unfortunately, many people who are living with this disease beyond 3 years are excluded from most clinical trials. How will you know how effective the treatment will be for the people who may be in the late stage of the disease if these are excluded from the trials?
Yeah, I agree with you that it's a problem, and it's done so that people can do 6-month studies and get answers in a faster time. And we make a leap of faith that if it works in those people, it's going to work in people later in the illness. One way to probably get at this is back to this idea of expanded access, where you can get drugs to people who aren't eligible for trials. You can collect data that's useful and helps answer those questions. I just think we have to do more of this.
Great. Perfect. So the next question is from Julie. And she's wondering if you have to actually live in the city for the trial to actually participate in the trial.
No, but you have to be able to go there and get there. So but we don't have any geographic limitation. It's really just what's feasible for you.
Okay. The next question is from Sherry, and she's wondering if platform trials must go through to phase 3, and the estimated time frame for the phase 3 results and potential approval in the open market.
So we designed it so that if it's a positive trial, it could be considered a registration trial, which would mean that it could be an approvable drug. We did that after lots of discussions with the FDA. So big shift in the FDA's view, again, thanks to Efficacy, that a 6-month study could be sufficient for approval. Now it has to obviously work and be consistent in all the outcome measures, but it might not have to go on to another trial.
Great. So the next question is from Kirstine, and she's wondering if she has her own umbilical cord on ice at Cyrogenetics, and she's wondering if this would help her in any way.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I don't have the answer. I do, like when people ask me if they should bank it, I'll say, if you can, yes, because who knows where the science is going to lead us on this, on whether those cells could be useful. There's certainly some preclinical data in animal models that there's things in there that are helpful for the motor neurons. So I think it's good that you saved it, but we don't have all the science or the answers yet.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to check in, Dr. Cudkowicz, because we have about 15 to 20 more questions, and I know we're past an hour now, and I just wanted to check on how you're doing with time and all.
I'm okay, but I want to also, for everybody else on the call, I'm happy to answer a few more or do it by email, whatever is better for all of you guys.
Okay. And do you want to tell me how many more I should ask, or? Oh, you're on mute. Okay, keep going. Okay. So the next question is from Kirsty, and no, we just asked that. Jay. So Jay asked, while we wait for these companies to get positive results for the trial, are there any recommended OTC, over-the-counter supplements or protocols that are recommended for PALS to consider taking?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's and it depends a little bit, a lot on you and your doctor and the things that you want to try. Some of the things I bring up to people are again based on other trials. So there's a trial of acetyl L-carnitine in Italy. It was just 50 participants, but it had some positive results and very safe. There was a trial in Spain of something called BASIS. That had some positive results. Again, a small study of 34 people. So these are the things that when I see people that I show them the papers, we talk about it, and I said, I don't know 100% that it works. Does it look unsafe? Would you, and then people decide for themselves if they want to take it.
Okay, great. The next question is from Julie, and she's asking, what study excites you the most for sporadic ALS specifically?
I like them all. So I'm excited about the complement inhibitors. I think that's a new idea in ALS. These are the drugs that might help block some of the damage between the nerve and the muscle connection. And we know that could be an early change in people with ALS. So there's the Alexion phase 3 trial that will start, and then the Raw Pharma is part of the platform. I think that's exciting. I'd like that ASO, the antisense against Ataxin, that should be coming this fall, hopefully, or later in the year.
Okay, perfect. So I think I'm going to say 2 more questions, and then the rest of the questions we will include in the emails following this meeting, and then Dr. Cudkowicz could answer them if she has the ability
Happy to.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the next question is from Joel's. He would like to know how much blue-green algae exposure toxicity has been linked to ALS.
That's a good question there. I think there's good epidemiology study from the group at Dartmouth and also at Miami that certainly people who live around lakes are at a higher risk. So I think it's a potential risk factor, but again, it's not a huge one. So I just some of these risks are 2 to 1, meaning that if the risk of ALS is 1 in 100,000, it's now 1 in 50,000 for that person. So I think it's a factor, but not a huge factor.
Okay, great. So the last question is from Michelle, and she would like to know if there are any studies that are evaluating the efficacy of the drug based on the types of environmental exposures.
Yeah, that's a good study. Not a good question, and not that I know of, other than maybe the one we're just talking about. There is a study of L-serine at Dartmouth, and that's a way to decrease the toxin that comes from the blue-green algae. That's probably the best example.
Okay, great. That is my last question for now. And again, I'm going to copy all these questions, and then we'll put it into the email and with responses from Dr. Cudkowicz. So that's coming up. Does McFinn want to close the meeting off?
Yeah. Thank you, Zoe, and thank you, Merit. This was excellent, and I think your answers are, bringing in more questions. So we keep seeing in the chat box more questions. So we've got a lot more questions, and people, everybody feel free to send us questions here and also at info@everythingals.org, and we will answer all the questions. We'll try to get to Dr. Merit.
Thank you.
Merit, you said 45 minutes and we took an hour and a half, and I know it's 9:30 out there. So thank you so much for spending the evening with us and with 200 plus people here. And we really appreciate it. And
thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you everybody for joining us. And we look forward to seeing more of you soon. Thank you.